Westminster, the home of British democracy, of truth, integrity, accountability. And if we don't believe that, what are we going to do about it?
If you want your future to be left to the creeps and cranks, then do nothing, because the creeps and the cranks will be happy to oblige, and they're already working away at it.
A lot of people seem to think our politicians tell lies.
At the moment, misleading is as common as drink driving used to be.
But did you know we don't really have a proper way of finding out?
Ministers don't lie. They'll be crazy to tell fibs.
I bet you tell lies from time to time. Do you want that to be a crime, even though it's not give rise to any particular problem?
Well, I'm not running the country.
This has been bad news for the government.
I very much regret that by not giving a fuller explanation at the time, the effect of my reply was misleading, and I offered my unreserved apologies to the House.
Cabinet Minister Jonathan Aitken has written to the Privy Council tendering his resignation as one of the Queen's special advisers.
The billions on capital had all been announced before. I mean, you're the biggest spin merchant north of Shane Warne. And you make the Prime Minister, you make the Prime Minister look like Ashley Giles. Is there any wonder? Is there any wonder there's a lack of trust in politicians?
Mr. Chairman.
What he said in that manifesto, Mr. Speaker, was
pure and pure, that people understand that we will not have any track with anything that's improper in any shape or form at all.
People that know me best know that I'm not a liar.
My name's Richard Symons. You won't be seeing me, but you will be seeing my journey. Dream with me a moment, as my alter ego makes the phone call I always wanted to make.
Hello, 8121.
Hello, is that MP4?
Speaking.
Hi, this is one of your constituents.
Oh, yes.
In fact, I voted for you at the last election.
Thank you very much. How can I help?
Well, I was wondering what I can do if I think an MP has been dishonest.
Dishonest?
Yes, lied.
Oh, may I ask who?
I'd rather not say yet. I'd just like to know what my options are.
Options?
Yes, well, if a company or an individual lies to me or makes a promise they can't deliver, I can take them to court.
Yes.
Because there's an obligation to be truthful in their representations.
Well, a Member of Parliament has the same obligation.
Yes, that's what I thought, but I was wondering where it says that. I mean, there must be a law.
A law?
And if they don't abide by it, what can the electorate do?
Well, for starters, you don't vote for them, I guess.
Yeah, but we only get a vote every 4 years, and even then it's for a party.
That's democracy. You can always go to the press.
So an MP's accountability is dependent on whether it'll sell newspapers?
I didn't say that.
But you are saying there's no statute, no law that requires an MP to be honest.
Well, I need to know a little bit more about it.
Would you be interested in sponsoring such a bill?
Maybe.
You don't think we should have it?
If I could take some details,
You're saying the electorate has to rely on its vote every 4 years for a newspaper editor to keep politicians honest. Aren't you?
Is this a wind-up?
I could ask you the same question.
So how does a member of the electorate, citizens like you and me, make sure our politicians tell the truth?
The Advice Bureau, can I help you?
Oh, hi. Is that the Citizens Advice Bureau?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, I wonder if you can. I wanted to find out how I could sue a member of the government, an MP. Hello.
MPs originally were the guarantors of freedom and liberty. Because they'd collectively removed the king. And so the only Bill of Rights that Britain had before the Human Rights Act, England to be precise, was the Bill of Rights from the 17th century, and that was designed to produce and secure parliamentary sovereignty. So in that context, the parliamentarians could say what they liked in Parliament, couldn't be arrested on the way to Parliament, could generally make laws, but in making laws be above the laws. Now the enemy at the time, or the perceived enemy, was the king. So there was a sense in which this was a great social advance. What's happened is it's kind of lingered and lingered and lingered, and now become something which, in a sense, many people feel is out of touch with the contemporary world.
Do you think it's acceptable for an MP to be able to lie without redress from his electorate or his constituents?
Well, some get away with it. A load of liars, you know. Some only joking, shrug off. I don't believe in vox populi, vox dei. I don't believe that the voice of the people is necessarily the voice of God, and I think that...
Are you saying you believe the voice of the House of Commons is the voice of God?
Well, that's the elected body. Collectively, that is the elected body of the country.
Yeah.
Right?
But they are elected to represent us.
Yeah, that's true.
The sovereignty flows from the people, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that if I employed someone and they lied on my behalf, or lied in my name without my permission, I'd be very, very upset.
Once you elect your MPs, then they are there for the period of a parliament, and there's very little you can do if you disagree with the way they're conducting themselves to get any redress. 5 years is a long time to wait before the next general election, or 4 is the average length of time that a parliament lasts. In the meantime, MPs and political parties get on with their business, lying, cheating, getting up to all sorts of chicanery. That's the popular view anyway. And there's no means of calling them to account.
There isn't a legal mechanism in place for you to do what you're asking to an MP. I'm afraid that's the law as it stands.
Criminal or civil?
Criminal or civil, yes.
Nothing?
Nothing. Not for lying. Parliament's self-regulating. I mean, there are different ways of complaining about MPs. There's the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards.
Actually, the bulk of complaints about lying relate to the actions of ministers, you know, not to others.
It probably speaks volumes in itself.
Nobody independent looks at complaints by members of the public or others about the actions of government ministers as ministers.
Really? There's no independent investigation of ministers? I'm confused, and so's my cabbie.
That can't be right. What about that cash for honours thing?
Good evening. Tony Blair has become the first serving Prime Minister to be questioned by police as part of a criminal investigation.
The Act against buying and selling peerages was put on the statute book in about 1925. And it was an individual, he happened to be an MP, Angus MacNeill, who complained to the police that the law was being broken, and the police took it up. They were probably more likely to take it up because he was a member of Parliament, but anyone can do that, yes.
See, the difference between cash for honours and prosecuting a politician for lying is that you, me, anyone can prosecute an MP, a minister, even a Prime Minister for selling peerages because there's a law against it. Why is it that I, as a member of the electorate, can't prosecute an MP for lying?
I mean, your question assumes that ministers are routinely lying, and that's a complete calumny.
If there's a constant reinforcement that somehow politicians are in the business of lying, as second nature,
Well, I don't
then
think...
I think you actually create a situation where you actually undermine democracy itself. We need to start to give some credit that people do not come into the business of public service from the point of view of wanting to lie to people.
Yes, but we don't legislate against murder on the assumption that the population are murderers. We've got a statute there to deal with those incidents of where someone kills. Why don't we have a statute in place which says, well, in the event that someone dealing with our most precious sovereignty misrepresents it, they're subject to the criminal law?
The number of occasions when ministers have lied in this government, knowingly told an untruth, or knowingly withheld important information are tiny. In fact, I can't think of any. I mean, there isn't a criminal offence of lying.
Plenty of laws against lying. I can't lie to clients. In fact, everything I say has to be fair, clear and not misleading. And if I breach that, I can lose my career. My company can be pursued and actually I can be taken to the criminal courts. Equally, if a company director lies to their shareholders, they can be ousted from their job and they can be pursued through the criminal courts. A manufacturer can't lie to their customers. An advertiser can't mislead consumers. An agent can't lie to the people that they represent. But there's no law stopping our elected representatives, the board and directors of Great Britain PLC, from misleading their shareholders.
There's clearly some difference of opinion here. Can there really be no law for them and heaps of laws for us? Let's get back to school to check out some of the basic principles of democracy.
If we, the people,
do we agree the people are sovereign?
Yes.
Where or who does an MP derive his power from?
From his electorate.
Power derives wholly from the people.
And our elected representatives represent our sovereignty in Parliament.
Yes.
I sometimes say to people, you of course are my employers. More to the point, they understand that they are my employer, which is why there isn't any deference there.
Do you think honesty is important?
Well, honesty is absolutely vital in democratic politics.
I do think an MP has an obligation to be honest.
Oh, totally. Yes, because, you know, democracy is very much about trust.
Absolutely.
Yes.
You have to be straightforward.
I think everyone has an obligation to be honest, and politicians in particular.
Breaking news. All these politicians seem to be agreeing with each other.
Where does that
Well, I'm trying to work out where are we getting to at the end of this.
Well, where does that obligation come from? That obligation for honesty?
Well, I think that if you are representing people, then you have to be accountable to them. And if you're asking for them to vote for you, you've got to have an honest relationship with them.
I agree, but is that obligation a legal one? I mean, is it enshrined in law?
No, I don't think it is.
In law, a Member of Parliament has no obligation.
It's not enshrined in law. No, it certainly isn't.
To my knowledge, I know of no statute whereby an MP is duty-bound to tell the truth.
So what you're saying is the electorate doesn't actually have any independent, impartial form of legal redress?
No, it certainly doesn't. You're touching here on a very serious point, because leaving aside the voice of the electorate in elections, one's ability to hold people to account is extraordinarily limited.
Yeah, the principle of increasing accountability is a very, very good principle indeed, and I would certainly buy into anything which lends itself to that.
At the moment, misleading is as common as drink driving used to be. I used to say when I was doing drink driving, you've got to reduce it to the level where, when it happens, people ask me to resign. If it's happening so often, they don't even bother.
This government set out to be, I think the term was, purer than pure, is what Tony Blair said. And nobody could sustain the argument that they have been purer than pure. Though my argument is, whereas John Major was very much associated with sleaze, in my view, this government have been associated with a loss of public trust.
I mean, look, I was elected into office on an issue of public trust. Public trust in public life is now lower than it was in 1997. And the issue that swept these people to power, they have completely abandoned as if not wanted on voyage. So that's, anyway, they didn't, no one's done this to them, they've done it to themselves. There are so many ways in which a government is constrained, by treaties, by conventions, by alliances, by forces it can't control, by sudden crises and emergencies. But one thing it can do is to make its priority restoring confidence in public life. There's nothing stops them doing it. They just didn't do it.
So if the government won't do it, what's the alternative?
There is a very great deal to be said for a regulatory mechanism which actually makes it unlawful, criminal, civil detail, unlawful to engage in lying for political gain of the type you so frequently see at election time. You could make a criminal offence the new misrepresentation of the People Act.
A bill, a law, we'll get our own statute. Something that gives us a proper investigation if we think our MP's misleading us.
How would you instigate such a thing?
Well, the obvious way to do it would be by a private member's bill. Now, you won't find the political parties very enthusiastic about this.
We figured we should get some advice. So went to see the only man to get onto the statute books, a bill that to this day strikes terror into the heart of government. Legend has it, before his act became law, Whitehall was up all night. He's a man who's done more to let us see what our government gets up to than anyone else in this country. Weirdly, he hasn't been nominated for a peerage.
Who actually drafts these bills? How do we get a bill drafted?
Well, I think you have to carefully go through what it is you want to obtain, what you want to achieve.
And then what? Just take it round to MPs and try and get a bit of support there?
You can take it round to members of Parliament, encourage them to think about it.
So, our elected representatives have agreed with the principles, they've accepted there's a problem, and they've confirmed there's no law in place. Let's see what they make of our bill.
We've actually drafted a misrepresentation of the People's Act.
Thank you very much indeed. It means you commit a criminal offence if an elected representative tells a lie, so you can be taken to a criminal court and either found guilty or not, and what's the penalty? Where an elected representative, an elected representative recklessly or intentionally tells a lie, they should be guilty of an offence. That's what your bill
in
is
matters
saying.
in matters of government.
Well, but you say make it a crime to tell a lie. I think it's going much, much too far to make it a crime, because I bet you tell lies from time to time. Do you want that to be a crime, even though it's not give rise to any particular problem?
Well, I'm not running the country.
No.
Well, thank you.
Your thoughts?
The issue really is just the forum for dealing with that. If ministers do any of those things, then the consequences for them are as serious or more serious as if they were taken before a criminal court, and they're swifter as well. So
I'm trying to figure out why it is that if we're giving our sovereignty, if the people give our sovereignty to ministers, to MPs, why we don't have a direct legal recourse for...
Because of the standards we have in this country and the checks and the transparency of our political process, ministers don't lie. They'll be crazy to tell fibs. If they do, I think they're almost always found out. I hope they are. The occasions are tiny, and the retribution on them, quite properly, is very heavy. But if you think about it, in the sort of celebrated cases that would have happened under this administration, where there have been allegations of a departure from standards, I think in every case the minister has resigned in any event.
History shows that ministers, particularly, who mislead Parliament or who lie, tend to lose their jobs. I know there are exceptions to that, and
Is that
sometimes I worry about it.
Recent history, or...?
I can think, well, certainly misleading Parliament. Recent history, I can think of at least one minister in the government who was forced to resign because of a misleading series of statements had been given to Parliament. And they certainly weren't lies. Parliament was misled.
And where's that particular minister you're thinking of now?
Well, that particular minister, I think, is back in office doing something else.
Both the standards which apply in government and for politicians generally, and the checks are such that even if that is your inclination, you'd be mad to do so. Because in our system, it would be the end of your career.
The end of their career? Drives me mad. What about Peter Mandelson?
When he saw today's papers, the man who'd once been Labour's presentational mastermind knew he had to go. The party couldn't be expected to soak up any more of his embarrassment. He'd told the Prime Minister last night he wanted to go and been advised to sleep on it. At 10 this morning, he phoned Mr. Blair and said his mind was made up.
Beverly Hughes, by mistake, said something that she acknowledged was wrong. She resigned as a minister within, I think, 5 days of making that mistake, which she acknowledged. Is that not an indication that a price is paid very quickly and pretty severely? Well, that was not something she said in Parliament, and that was something she said on Newsnight.
And she's now what?
She's now the Minister for Children. Do you think the right price for her would have been to be cast out of politics?
And David Blunkett?
He was back in very short order, and I think that did reflect enormously badly on the government, and that would have made, would have had an effect on the way people saw that. And of course, he didn't survive very long either.
So if an MP misleads us, deliberately or not, it doesn't always seem to be the end of their career. Let's press on.
You're getting an MP to introduce this.
It's called the Misrepresentation of the People's Act.
That's a great line.
I mean, this is naive.
I'm telling you the absolute truth here. I haven't got my glasses on.
My question is, who decides?
Who is going to make this decision?
If you're saying to me, should there be some external regulator of Parliament? No, because that would be to hand over a good chunk of our democratic politics to people who would actually be less accountable than our parliamentarians.
And that's ultimately the big question in democracy.
Who decides what?
Who decides who is the Prime Minister? And under
we decide who's the Prime Minister. But as soon as he's lied...
If it gives the judges power to get rid of people who've been elected by the ballot, then I'd be against it.
It gives the people the power.
No, it doesn't. Well, how come the people have got the power?
Well, they instigate it with the judges.
So who judges now?
Did you know that all the committees and watchdogs set up by Parliament to police our politicians report back to Parliament? Is that sensible?
Well, there is an independent commissioner of standards.
My job is to investigate, to receive the complaint, investigate, and make a recommendation as to whether I think the code has been breached. It's up to the committee to decide if it agrees with me.
As a sovereign House of Commons, it keeps the final decision within the Palace of Westminster instead of trying to subcontract it out to someone else. So I think we got the balance right. And no one has a greater interest in policing the code, setting high standards of conduct for members of Parliament than members of Parliament. So we have a self-interest.
The electorate
yes.
may have.
The committee formally is an advisory committee to the Prime Minister.
So effectively, you make the recommendations and then the government decides whether to implement them or not.
Yes.
At the moment, the ministerial code is promulgated by the Prime Minister, and he it is, advised by the Cabinet Secretary, who decides whether or not there's been a breach of the code.
So the team captain also gets to be the referee. Nice.
This whole thing of sort of self-regulation of Parliament, it occurs to me that it doesn't really work out if one party decides not to play ball and becomes shameless.
I think self-regulation of Parliament is by and large a myth, and it's subsumed into the power of Parliament, if you like. Who holds the power?
I mean, the real world is that the Prime Minister, in the end, the buck stops with you. I mean, that's the top job, and that's how it should be.
The problem there is that the judgment is made effectively by the Prime Minister.
Whoever holds the power will determine, whatever outcome they want. And if they don't want accountability, there will be no accountability. That's just the harsh reality.
Quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who guards the guards is the real question that we have to ask ourselves now in the British Constitution.
So if a minister's accused of lying, Gordon Brown is judge and jury. Isn't it usually members of the great British public in the jury box? Next objection, please.
Parliament is able to hold politicians to account by asking question after question after question.
No, I will answer it in this way. I think it is important to make sure...
Certainly it is much more difficult to get questions answered. I mean, very often we get delayed answers, very, very, very long delays on answers.
What is the system where a member of the Parliament, a member of the public, or even a member of Parliament could hold the Prime Minister to account? The answer is with difficulty if they're determined to be evasive.
Now, he completely failed to answer the first question that I asked him. Let me ask him another one.
If it's a difficult question, ministers will often give quite a long answer using up time, and then the second question that you're allowed to ask, again, it'll be a longish answer, and they know that you can only have 2 goes, and that's it.
A simple answer, yes, will suffice. I'm afraid you won't quite get that.
A lot of the answers that we get to written questions are really non-answers, and if you take 1,000 questions, you'll be lucky to find a dozen really solid answers.
Quite often we get comments like, or get responses which say it's too expensive to answer this question, when we know it's not.
In my background as a barrister, and if you're trying to get at the truth in court, you can ask as many questions as you want, as long as they're relevant and you're following up. And that's what's missing here quite often, that you can't just pursue the matter until you get to the truth of it.
So Parliament can't make the government answer questions. But why don't MPs just vote against them to force an answer? After a general election, the Queen invites the leader of the winning party, that's the party with the majority of MPs, to form a government. It maintains this majority by controlling which way their MPs vote with what's affectionately known as the party whip. Voting against your party, especially on a 3-line whip, is often an invitation to discuss your career development opportunities.
People are less willing to understand why there is such a thing as a party whip. And I think that's a great shame, because I don't think you can have a functioning democracy without parties.
And therein lies the problem, because really since the birth of the party system at the end of the 19th century, what we've seen is that the independent mindedness of backbench members of parties has slowly ebbed away.
The classic role of members of Parliament, that on behalf of our constituents we control government. Now, unhappily, that has fallen by the wayside.
And you cannot have a functioning government without having what is broadly based a party whip.
I think the party political machines have achieved a power which is unhealthy. Prime ministers have arrogated to themselves a power of patronage. So those two things colliding together have meant that members of Parliament have either emasculated themselves or been emasculated. And on top of that, we have the phenomenon of the professional politician.
When I first came into this place, and it's even truer in the 50s and before the Second World War, there were lots of people in this house who were people of major consequence outside their party, because either they had been very successful in the professions, or because they were successful businessmen, or because they had an appeal to the wider public through their own oratory and status. What we now have got increasingly is a parliament of apparatchiks, people who work up their way through the party hierarchy and frankly have no authority or real status outside their party hierarchy.
I mean, the fact is that I was elected not because people in their tens of thousands thought I was a wonderful human being. I was elected because I was the Labour candidate, and I still am.
That is thoroughly bad, because they are entirely beholden to their party for whatever they are, and they have no authority to set against party discipline.
And therefore, what does an ordinary backbencher do in the governing party when they feel that they have been lied to as a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party?
And the only way to succeed is to incur the patronage of the Prime Minister.
The carrot, the power of patronage, of course, in the House of Commons. If one wants to be a minister, you keep your copybook clean and tidy.
The only way you're going to get that is by effectively abnegating your responsibility to control the Prime Minister.
You can, and sometimes should do it, and I have done it often enough. But
how many times have you voted against the government?
I voted against the government on Iraq.
Karen actually voted only for amendments for the motion to go to war. On what was considered the actual vote for war, Karen abstained. Now over 40 other Labour MPs did this too, and a cynic may say this was probably seen as a compromise with the whips, so MPs could tell the public they had voted against the war, whilst not actually threatening their party's parliamentary majority or their own career prospects.
We're not electing individual members of Parliament with their own consciences anymore, but voting for, effectively, party automata, or at least, that's been, I think, the problem, one of the tensions within our Constitution.
We knocked up a thing called the Misrepresentation of the People Act. Do you think that that's something you could support or not?
And I'm not trying to say that this government has created the problems. I do think they have aggravated it. But it does lie in the fact that the executive, the government, has captured the House of Commons. They control the party, their party, the government party. They control the business. They timetable the debates. They limit the debates. Many amendments and clauses go to the House of Lords undiscussed, without any kind of discussion. And this place is dominated by the government, where it should not be so.
Oh, it looks interesting. You know, I mean, absolutely. You know, why not have the discussion? But I mean,
You see, with intent to deceive, you've got a problem there. Where an elected representative publishes the course be published in there a statement or cut, well, that's all right. Let's not read every paragraph.
Okay.
At the end of the day, I come back to where I started. I actually do not believe that the criminal law is the way to address this problem. I agree with you that there is a very serious problem here. I think it's cured, if it can be cured at all, in a political, not a legal way. I want to see this house stuffed full of people like Tam Dael, cross-grained individualists. And I think if you could get that, that would be a huge benefit to us all. That is the way forward, rather than, in my view, criminal measures, which I suspect will serve no purpose.
I really do need to be convinced that there is evidence that people deliberately
lie.
The truth is no longer something which is out there and independent. It's something which is constructed. There is only versions of the truth, there are only narratives. There's an amazing phrase actually by Peter Mandelson, you know, our job is to create the truth. He said that in an interview with The Guardian about 1995. I sent an email to Mandelson, what do you mean by this? He came back and tried to deny having said it or not having meant it.
No, hold on a minute. Take that off. Hold on.
He tried to win over an often hostile media. The phrase spin doctor seemed designed for him.
The philosophy of postmodernism is to blame thinkers like Derrida. You find the language of postmodernism being liberated from its academic backwater by New Labour thinkers. You find this phrase, interesting phrase, the construction of the truth, being used. It starts to introduce it into the political environment, into political discourse.
So, let's just see where we got to. Everyone agrees with the principles. We the people are sovereign, MPs work for us, they have an obligation to be honest, but right now we can't legally enforce that. And yet, no one agrees we need to. They've said, you can't have a law against lying. We said, we already do. They said, if ministers mislead, it's the end of their career. We said, no it isn't. Besides, between government spin and the trial by media, how can we possibly know the truth? They said, there's plenty of self-regulation. We said, precisely. If you want the public's trust, you can't be judge and jury at your own trial. They said,
Parliament is able to hold politicians to account by asking question after question after question.
We said, no it can't. You're not forced to answer parliamentary questions, and the conventions for asking them are outdated, and besides that, the party whip's far too powerful. They said, you can't give power over to people who are less accountable than Parliament, like judges. We said, you already do. Look at cash for honours. It's just that currently, the judges don't have a law against lying to enforce. The question is, will they run out of arguments before we find an MP with the balls to back this bill? Maybe, maybe not.
Extra, read all about it.
The press are pretty good at holding MPs to account.
Why should I have to go to the press? If you get burgled, assaulted, cheated or defrauded, you don't go to the press, you go to the police because there are laws. The press are in the business of selling newspapers. I may not want to go to the press.
Well, I'd rather see the press regulated more than it's regulated at the moment. I mean, that would be a pretty big step towards democracy in this country.
Are you saying that the press is dishonest, or are you saying...
Absolutely dishonest. Gosh, not per se. I mean, but I mean, the Daily Mail spills out rubbish every day.
I think the public perception of MPs is so low, partly because of people like you, because you make accusations that we're all charlatans and crooks.
I never made that accusation.
Well, you suggested it may happen. I mean, the whole of this interview...
I'm sorry, I absolutely refuse.
The whole of this interview has been based on the proposition that MPs are dishonest and therefore one ought to be able to sue them and get rid of them.
Absolutely not true. The whole of this interview is based on the proposition that the electorate gives its sovereignty to MPs, and at the moment we are allowed to address that once every 4 or 5 years.
Don't come this puritanical thing with me, young man. I mean, the fact is that we've got a funny old press in this country. Oh, sorry. Hello?
See if you'd be comfortable proposing that bill in the House for us.
I'd want to read it and consider it in detail, and I don't think I'd do it with the camera on.
But would you support such a thing?
Certainly worth debating and discussing.
I mean, you're on an important issue, and there's no doubt that we ought to look at it.
Anarchy would reign.
Thanks for showing me that, because it is something that I will read with interest and see what I think, you know.
I've made what my attitude to this legislation pretty clear. If we're trying to hammer away until you just get some chink, then perhaps it's better that we end the interview now.
We're talking about a fundamental change to our constitutional system, which you're airily proposing on the basis of these wild general phrases, which seem to me to have little actual meaning.
No, I'm not trying to get a chink. I'm trying to find out whether...
I mean, I just simply don't agree with you and
in the principle
that piece of legislation, and I hope I've said so.
Well, I think we're talking about a misleading or misrepresentative statement.
I don't agree with this piece of legislation. I think
on the basis that...
I don't agree with it because there has been an election since the example that I used for you, and the people of Britain didn't exercise their right to change the government.
At 9 o'clock last night, just 23 hours ago, Britain's day of decision was over. The last votes had been cast. The ballot boxes were sealed. Inside them was the secret of this election, guarded over by the police. Constables stood by as the boxes were taken away from the polling stations to the counting centres.
I'm afraid their remedy has to be through the ballot box.
It's designed for, you know, it works the vast majority of the time. The rare occasions when there will be a wish to remove a single person, no, that mechanism isn't there, that's true.
Worthy, but I think actually, in practice, unworkable. And that's why, at the end of the day, it is the verdict of the electorate and the preservation of that power of the electorate to kick out governments and, by implication with them, the ministers who they think have acted wrongly, which is the best protection that we have.
Can you tell me, did you vote at the last general election?
No. To be honest, I can't actually remember.
Sorry?
No. No, I didn't actually.
No, I didn't.
I actually can't remember, but I don't think I did.
What they don't realise is that political campaign techniques are in large part aimed at persuading them not to vote. The best outcome is vote for me. The second best outcome, don't vote at all. And political campaigns by all political parties are in large measure aimed at telling people who wouldn't anyway vote for me to not vote because the other guys are so awful. The sad thing is that the people who are poorest, most disenfranchised, are those least likely to vote, and therefore they're the least important
to the MPs in the House of Commons.
What am I supposed to know? 4 or 5 years of TV and papers saying one thing and the government saying something else. You can't judge anything if you don't know you're dealing with the facts. When I know they can't lie to me because I can do something about it, I'll know who to vote for. That's when I'll know.
The problem is that we can only kick governments out on the basis of the information we receive. And if there's lies floating about Parliament, we're very, very limited in our judgment.
Yes, that's...
we have to rest. Our judgment is based on the press.
I entirely accept that that's a real problem, and it is an argument for more open government.
Can I ask you, did you vote at the last election?
Yes.
How do you feel about a law that made it a criminal offence for politicians to lie?
Oh, I agree with it, yes.
Is it not already a criminal offence for members of Parliament to lie?
No, absolutely not. No.
Well, in that case, sounds like a good idea, but I don't know. I suppose it has to be voted for by the people who are trying to, who are victims of the law, in a sense, so maybe it would be difficult.
What do you think our chances are?
Extremely slim. Not very good.
This interview is about to come to an end. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's fairly clearly defined in various...
Well, there are conventions, as I've said, there are conventions which explain. I really don't want to carry on with this interview, but can you forget you've come here to interview me at all? I think this is so ridiculous, this whole thing.
If evidence can be found, and there has to be a proper process, of course, which confirms that a politician has lied about a matter of substance in Parliament, then they should be forced to resign and be debarred from ever seeking to represent the people again, because truth is the fundamental basis for democracy. Those who lead us cannot mislead us and then expect to get away with it. I'd love to be one of the principal nominees. I would introduce this as a bill. Fantastic. There we are. Yeah, I'll sign my name to it. Yeah. All I need is about 3 weeks' notice. I can introduce it.
Unbelievable. Who'd have thought? But now what? Where do we go from here?
The first thing we need to do is to see the Clerk of Legislation. I think I've got a slot for a 10-minute rule bill allocated to me. We need to confirm the date, and he can also help us with strategy and drafting the bill.
The secret to getting this into any kind of debatable form is to put it through the parliamentary draftsman. I mean, these are a sort of secret society, a very small group of people, and they draft all of the legislation that goes before Parliament.
My job really is about the process of legislation. not the outcomes, but to ensure that the way that the House considers legislation and scrutinises it is properly supported, and that the House's rules on legislation are observed. So far as private members' bills are concerned, generally they are, as a class, rather fragile vessels. That's principally the task of the clerk in charge of private members' bills, Chris Shaw.
The 10-minute rule bill is one method for private members to introduce a bill. You've given me a text of what you want to do, and that seems to be a reasonable base to work on. It's going to need some amendment, and particularly of the short and long title.
I was very attracted to the title because it is deliberately cheeky.
I know.
It's historical.
That's right. And that's it for the sort of public viewing.
Okay.
Unfortunately, because of the rules of strict impartiality and sensitivity surrounding any advice given by the clerk of legislation, you're not allowed to hear this.
Well, we got through that with the bill still in fairly good shape. In essence, all we've had to change is the title to Elected Representatives' Prohibition of Deception. The long title is A Bill to Create Offences in Relation to the Publication of False and Misleading Statements by Elected Representatives and for Connected Purposes.
Despite losing our catchy title, the bill was still looking good. But then, out of the blue, Adam got some bad news.
So it looks like we've lost the slot for the 10-minute rule bill. It's very frustrating, but the slot that I was hoping for has already been allocated. It's the three big political parties, whips, offices, the centre of political power, of course, in the parliamentary system. They've already allocated the slots, and maybe the idea of a bill on truth and accountability wasn't something that they were particularly attracted to. I don't know, but we haven't been allocated that slot, so we've got to go for the alternative now.
Adam decided on a new strategy, a combination of what they call a back-of-the-chair bill, together with an early-day motion, or EDM.
An EDM is a useful little device. It's been used in the past even to bring governments down through calling for a vote of no confidence. And if we get a large number of MPs supporting the EDM from across the House, then it certainly makes a huge difference to how the bill is perceived in Parliament.
What do you think our chances are?
Yours? I think the world is going your way. I think the MPs I know are tired of being held in such low esteem. I mean, it's not pleasant to be held in contempt by most people, and they're particularly angry at those MPs who do bring the whole system into disrepute. So I think there's a readiness to change. You might get somewhere with this.
We've got the EDM ready to go down to the table office. Let's see if we can drum up some support. Okay. Right, let's go. You coming?
Yep.